Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about the 9 books that I've read over the last couple weeks. First, I tried to continue reading the Elizabeth Peters Amelia Peabody series with book 17, The Serpent on the Crown. I have been reading this series on and off for the last few years. I enjoyed the first few books, especially as Amelia Peabody's son was growing up. There was a lot more forward momentum in those books, plot and character-wise, than there have been in the later books, which is why it's been taking me so long to get through the final few books in the series. I tried again to get through the next book in the series, and I just can't do it anymore. The mystery part is super slow. There's not any other type of character development going on like there were in the earlier books. And while that's comforting for some readers who are looking for that kind of stability, it wasn't working for me, so I've given myself permission not to continue with this series. I will say, though, that the audiobook narration by Barbara Rosenblatt is brilliant. Rosenblatt does a fantastic job of taking on the voices of the different characters throughout this series, so if you're interested in reading this, I do recommend the audiobook. Next, I am continuing the Tower and the Hive series by Anne McCaffrey. I finished book 4, Lion's Pride, and unfortunately the series has been up and down for me, and it's just going downhill at this point. Book 4 felt very much like filler. There wasn't too much that happened, especially compared to the pacing of the previous books. There's a lot of attempts at matchmaking throughout this book, which is done in a way that just feels really gross and forced. A lot of the women are described and introduced by way of their appearance when men aren't, which is especially frustrating because the women in these books are very strong and they're very competent, so there's no reason to have this forced focus on their appearance throughout that just doesn't even make sense in the context of the book. There are some discrepancies in the book details, unless my memory is just going haywire. I've read other Anne McCaffrey series that take place in different universes, and some of those details, like the types of energy drinks that the characters drink, seem to be spilling into this series now, when in earlier books in the same series they were using different types of energy drinks. One of the characters, Zara, doesn't seem to be consistent throughout. In previous books, she was very empathetic toward the Hydra species, and she hated hunting and having to kill animals. It was almost like she was a vegetarian, and in this book, she was just all over the place as far as those previous values were, and I'm not sure why. There's one particular plot point that I can't get into because of spoilers, but it didn't make sense, and I make a note of this in my Goodreads review in a spoiler section, which I'll link to down below if you want to take a look at that. Also, this book introduces its first gay character, and while the characters are surface level accepting, there's a lot of problematic approaches to the way this character is focused on and his sexuality is focused on in this book, complete with a literal quote about him doing whatever he wants to do in his private life, but it doesn't matter because he's really good in his work, which of course is not the standard by which the straight characters are held, since the book gets into their personal life constantly and it has nothing to do with their work. And it's really problematic that this character is the only one in the series to have experienced a very traumatic relationship that he's like surviving and recovering from in the past couple of books. Not only was it the only traumatic relationship in this series, but it was also the only triad relationship. So there's just so much of this one character being forced to carry all of these negative stereotypes. So overall, I gave this book 2 stars. I am slowly making my way through book 5. We'll see how bad it is. Next, I read The Bride Test by Helen Hoang. This is a sequel to The Kiss Quotient, which I enjoyed. There are some really fantastic moments in this book, but then they're weighed down by some really problematic ones, so I kind of averaged both of those things into a middle star rating of 3 stars. I really liked the utter lack of male dominance or toxic masculinity. The relationships between the male characters was a pleasure to read. I really liked Kai getting relationship advice from his cousin and his brother. It was so awkward of a scene, but also really touching, that they want to help him and be totally honest about it. And the way that they talked about relationships with women to Kai showed that they themselves are also very good guys and protagonists of romance books that I, as a reader, want to connect to. I think Hoang does a really good job of describing how characters think and the emotions they go through without breaking any type of pacing and getting too far in depth into each character's brain. I liked Esme's character, her drive, her determination, and how she's a person with goals and how she reaches those goals separate from the romance arc. There's a consistent theme throughout this book about how incredibly important transparent communication is, regardless of the type of relationship that you have, and I really appreciated that. The problems I had with this book is that the entire premise and the first chunk of this book is based on breaking Kai's boundaries. Of course, it's a romance book, so he ends up in a relationship with the female protagonist, but it starts out with him being so resistant to the idea and his mother basically finding a bride for him and forcing her to live with him when he doesn't want that. It was a very problematic basis for the plot in this book. Esme has a daughter, and it took way too long for her to reveal that she had a daughter. She's thinking about it throughout, and it works out very conveniently at the end of the book, but it reached the point where it became almost actively deceitful. It took so long to get that out there because that's a pretty big thing to keep secret if you're trying to be in a relationship with someone. And then the end scene where all the plot lines come together felt very performative and convenient. I didn't like that so much. But overall, again, there were some really good positives, and I do recommend giving this book a try. I also continued the Wayward Children series with In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it, but like with the first one, because they're all novellas and therefore shorter, I almost feel like the story's over before I've had a chance to really get into it and process it. Overall, though, I did enjoy it. I liked the take on a fairy tale kind of gone wrong, or it doesn't always end happily. Overall, I definitely recommend this series. It's doing a lot of very different things with the themes. Over the last couple weeks, I've wrapped up my delve into interior design books. I'm done with all the books that I've checked out from the library on this topic at this point. A Home for the Soul, I ended up DNFing. It's the most basic of basic to the point of almost uselessness. What it really does is explain how people can think about their home as a metaphor, and if you've ever thought about a metaphor in your life, these connections are pretty obvious. Like, bathing can cleanse the body, but also the mind. I guess there are people out there who haven't made that connection, so this could be helpful for them. I personally didn't find it helpful. The book takes a very long time to say anything at all, and if you think about it less as an interior design book and more of a collection of archetypes and correspondences, then it works a lot better. It goes through the entire kitchen section on what apples have meant in the past and what pots have meant and that sort of thing. I did appreciate that this book was not Christian-centric. It included Christian correspondences, but it did go worldwide and history-wide. So it was very comprehensive in that aspect. Make Yourself at Home was really good. It was very personalized from the author. The way that she presented herself and her history and her journey to make herself at home resonated with me as a reader and how I could extrapolate that into making myself in my own home. The book is organized really well, and there are different spotlights on different people throughout the book that provide other perspectives besides just the author, which I thought were done really well and integrated very effectively. I also appreciated the author's genuine interest in supporting women entrepreneurs and the way that she does that through her own business. It felt very genuine and is certainly a laudable endeavor, so I definitely recommend that book and gave it 4 stars. I finished the Memoirs of Lady Trent series by Mary Brennan with book 5 within the Sanctuary of Wings. Like every other book I've read in the series, I gave it 4 stars. I enjoyed it. I do think that the main discovery in this book was a little out there, even for this world, and knowing in retrospect that the author did intend to plan for that kind of discovery throughout the books. But despite it feeling out there, I think the author did the best that she could to integrate it and make it feel realistic in the events and how they unfolded. And it stayed true to the characters in the series. I absolutely adored the epilogue. It came full circle from book one in how Lady Trent fashioned her life and what her goals were. And I'm trying not to give any spoilers, but it was one of the most satisfying epilogues I've ever read. So overall, this is a really great, really fun, really satisfying series, and I highly recommend it. And lastly, for the last couple weeks, I continued the Lazarus series with the X+66 volume, which is a short story collection that takes place in this world, and I think it's supposed to bridge the gap between volume 5 and volume 6, which I think just came out actually. I need to check on that. It is one of the best short story collections I have ever read. I love Lazarus as a series, and these 6 stories just continue to prove how strong the world is and how well the author picks moments to elaborate on and picks characters to elaborate on that speak to the themes that make the reader interested in what's going on. It's just brilliant. Not only does each story have its own interesting side characters, but they really do bridge the gap in the overall plot of the Lazarus series. So it's doing double duty here in a really fantastic way. The art continues to amaze me when there's action. The progression from panel to panel is spot on. I love how the author in one story will have a side character mentioned that you just write off as a flat character, and then suddenly they show up in their own story arc that is full of meaning. And I just love that the author plays with the reader that way and says, no, actually, we have thought about this character, we have thought about how they fit into the story, and it makes the world feel so full. Which brings me to Lazarus Sourcebook Collection Volume 1. This is not a story collection, it is literally basically an encyclopedia of the world, a very dense, here are the different parts of the world, here's how they work, how they're structured politically, how many people there are, that sort of thing. I didn't actually finish reading this book because it is an encyclopedia, and unless I was going to play a role-playing game based around this world or write fan fiction in this world, I don't need all those details. The stories themselves do a great job of incorporating all that information and getting me what I need to understand the story. Even though I DNF'd this book, I gave it 5 stars because it just goes to show how much effort and detail and time the author has spent developing this world, and just goes to prove why the stories work so well. It's a great reference book, and I cannot wait to continue this series. It comes out way too slowly for my satisfaction, but I understand they can wait as long as they need to because they are doing such a fantastic job with it. And that's everything that I read over the last couple weeks. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts on them are. Thanks for joining me.